Hey everybody, this week we're going to be focusing on this rectum case right here, and these can be kind of interesting, kind of fun because the PTV shape is kind of an interesting one. So it's your typical node field up here, but then these lower nodes split off, and so you always have these three separate targets. And most of the time, instead of doing a cone down or a sequential boost, so like your initial big PTV and then you do a smaller PTV for your boost after the fact, a lot of the times you do these SIB or simultaneous integrated boost. That's what that stands for. Or a lot of people call this dose painting. So essentially we have three different volumes right here. This cyan volume is going to 45 gray. This maroon volume up here, these nodes up here are going to go to 50-40, and this red volume here is going to go to 54. We're going to do all that at the same time in 30 fractions. So a lot of people will separate these out, so you can see up here these two volumes overlap right here, and you can see right here this volume is completely inside of this 45. A lot of times, if a considerable amount of overlap is present, so if you look over here, pretty big percentage of this 45 gray PTV is covered by what's going to get 54. So a lot of times I will separate that out. I'll make a 45 minus 54 right here. And I'll just go ahead and do that just to show you guys, but I'm going to actually in the optimizer show you how to do it without using those new PTVs with everything separated out. But I'll make this real quick just to show you. So we'll do 45, remove the inside of 54 with no gap, like that. And we'll kind of look at that on the DVH and the optimizer just to show you the difference there. We're going to turn that off though. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to show you how to not separate these out. We're going to use these volumes as is. I know the previous weeks I've said I usually don't use rings or any of those type of kind of optimization or planning structures, but this is one site that I feel does benefit from rings just because you do have this separation in your PTVs, and sometimes the NTO, that normal tissue objective, has a hard time getting your higher isotope to split up in these areas. So let's make two rings. I'm going to make my standard 70 ring and my standard 50 ring. So we don't have a PTV total either, and I want these rings to go around all my PTVs. So actually what I'm going to do is first take that ring 70 contour and I'm going to add all of my PTVs up. 45, 54, 50, 40. Okay, so now we just made a PTV total with this ring 70, but then I'll just use that same contour to create my ring. 70. I'm going to make 1.7 my outer margin and 0.7 my inner margin, minus 0.7. And there we go. So I'm going to put an upper objective of 70% on that ring. 50, we're going to do the same thing. Outer margin 4, inner margin minus 2. So again, remember, all that means is I have a 2 cm gap from my PTV to the ring, and then my ring is 2 cm thick. right? I don't think it really matters if you leave rings and stuff like that outside the body. Probably not super important, but I don't know. Usually I fix it. But again, don't think it matters very much. Okay, so that's all we're going to create for planning. Feel free to subtract, your PTVs out if that's what you're used to in your clinic, or if that makes more sense to you. But hopefully, after watching this demo, you kind of understand how to do it with just leaving them as is. Let's insert a new plan. Usually when there's multiple volumes, I always pick the volume getting the highest dose as my target. But again, your clinic will kind of have guidelines for that, and maybe your physician will have a specific way he wants his prescription to read, so that'll affect what volume you pick. But we're going to use that PTV 54. Okay, so our prescription is going to be 180 times 30. But we're going to give 45 gray to this volume and 50.4 to this. So that 45 gray volume is going to get 150 a day. And that 50/40 volume is, I don't know, 160 something or something like that. But we're delivering those doses all at the same time in 30 fractions. And again, that's called SIB plan, simultaneous integrated boost, or lots of people call it dose painting. So since we picked that 54 volume, it threw our isocenter right in the center of that 54 volume, which is probably okay. But when we do our arc geometry tool, we need to select all three of those PTVs so that it knows we're treating all three of those volumes like that. So I just use my control key to select all three. We're going to use 2 full rotations. Let's leave it at 30 and just see what happens. So it automatically will move your isocenter to the center of all three of those PTVs since we selected all three. So we want that right for this time. That's good. But if you don't want it to move your isocenter when it creates your fields, you come to this fine-tune fields tab and you can uncheck this adjust isocenter checkbox and it won't move your isocenter. Okay, so if we leave our collimator at 30, you can see our X jaws right here are really wide, 27 cm. So what I like to do is kind of play with that number and see if it goes down. So at 15, it actually went up. So if we go the other way, 45, it goes up. 30 is the lowest so far. So 30 just happens to give us the smallest jaw size right here. And so that's how, when I deal with these really, really large volumes, I initially choose my collimator angle based on this right here. I kind of adjust this angle until I get the smallest X jaw size. But of course, even more importantly would be to adjust based on OARs that you're trying to avoid and things like that. So for this one, the bladder is going to be most important, or what we're going to be avoiding kind of the most, and it's kind of right in the middle. So I think 30 degrees is going to be fine. These MLCs are going to be able to come in and block that bladder pretty effectively and still treat most of the PTV. So I think 30 is appropriate, but our X jaws right now are way too wide. That total X jaw of 26.8 is way too wide. It's going to cause problems, I think. your plan will run fine, but I promise you, if you limit these extras, your plan will come out better at the end of your optimization. So I'm going to drag my X1 over until this is, I always tell people like 17-ish is the max you should get. So 17.5, that's fine. Remember, SureBeams has jaw tracking, so we have jaw tracking right now. So these jaws will never get bigger than your initial jaw setting, but they can get smaller. So from this field of view right here, the max is 17.5, but look here, we have at least 2 cm margin over here. So this jaw is gonna automatically close to about right there, to about our 15 that we want. So I feel like with jaw tracking, you can kind of cheat a little bit up above 15 to maybe 17, 18 or so, something like that. But anyways, I dragged that one over. So we're missing our PTV over here when we do that. But with our other field, I drag the opposite one over. And then this field would be catching that part of the PTV. So between both of these fields, we're catching all of the PTV from at least, you know, one of those beams. But when I have to move my jaw that much, so when I miss that much PTV, I like to add a third field. So what I like to do is copy that first field. I use the same collimator. I just drag this one back over and move this one. So now from between field 1 and field 3, we're catching the entire PTV, both PTVs, at the same collimator angle of 30. It seems to work. So I've played around with this a lot. I've used, you know, different collimator for that third beam, so maybe like 15 or 45 or something like that. I've experimented a ton. I like to do it this way. I think this way works out the best, but please, the best way you can learn, the best way you can figure out new things is to just experiment. So you just got to experiment with stuff like this, different collimators, different beam orientations, and whatnot. But this is what I like to do. Seems to give me the best results, at least. Okay, so we have our beam set up. That's good. We have our prescription set up. If you haven't learned already, save often. Eclipse likes to crash. Oops. Gonna switch to PO 15.6. All right, so like always, I'm gonna add my uppers and lowers on my PTVs as a starting point, but since all of these overlap with each other, we're gonna do things a little bit differently. So I'm gonna add 2 uppers on these 2 lower dose PTVs. So 100, I want to get 45. 100, I want to get 50/40. 5400. So this highest one, I only need 2. Want this to be 105 like usual. These need to be a little different though. So this 50/40 volume, actually we only need 2. So this 50/40 volume does not even get close to this 54 volume, so we can we don't have to worry about this one as much. We just need our standard 1 upper, and I'm not gonna, well, I think it's 5292, I think is 105, something like that. This one though, this 45 volume overlaps both with 50/40 and with 54. So we're going to focus on the highest dose that it overlaps with, 54. So I'm going to put 1 upper just slightly underneath that. So like 5350. Whoops, 5350. So remember, you kind of always put your objectives a little bit more or less than what you shoot for. So even though we're asking a good percentage of this to get 54, we put 5350 in here. It's just what I like to do in order to avoid any crazy hotspots. If we need to up this to maybe 5450 or something, if we feel this is really affecting our coverage on this volume, we'll change it, but we'll leave it at 5350 for now. And then this volume, we're going to leave it 0, and I'll show you kind of how we deal with that in a bit. So I'm going to get started just like this. So I forgot to put my rings in. Anytime I have rings or AP, PA voids, or anything like that I'm using to just really kind of generally shape my dose, I always add those at the beginning too. So let me just add those real quick. So to start, I'm going to do 50% of 50/40, okay? Whoops, 50. And 70% of 50/40, or 54, I mean, which is 3780. Okay, there we go. So as usual, I'm going to let this get to step 3. But while it's getting there, we can start playing around with this one. So we want to limit the dose above 45 to this 45 volume, right? Ideally, this would get exactly 45, but a bunch overlaps. So what we have to do is we can't be too strict with this additional upper, or else it'll ruin our coverage to this 54 volume. So I start with this up pretty high, and then we should be able to kind of tell exactly how much overlaps with this 54 and a little bit with that 50/40, just based on how this DVH shapes out. So we start with it up pretty high, and I'm just going to slowly start dragging this down. So you don't want to do it too fast. So since it spiked quite a bit right there in step 2, I'll just pause it, let it level out a little bit. So you can see here we have this pretty sharp bend forming, right? So you should be able to keep going down. It's not affecting this 54 coverage at all yet, right? So I want to push this down until I'm right at that point where I start to affect this. Just like my OARs, I'm trying to get this dose to this 45 gray volume as low as possible. I only want high dose in the area where it overlaps with that 54 gray volume. You can kind of look at this too and see that, you know, this like 5130 is kind of really spilling out on the sides of this 54. So what you can even do is add a second, an additional upper, kind of try to control that dose up here too. So we're in step 3. So this is where just, you know, experience planning these cases will come into play, but this is a pretty drastic shoulder here that we've got. So I know I just can't get this much better. And then if you look at our isodose lines, I mean, there's no weird hot spots up around here. We'll have to adjust these a little bit to get a better idea, but I don't have any crazy hot spots. It's starting to only really have that high dose around our higher isodose or our higher dose PTVs, which is what we want. So we'll keep an eye on that, but let's start adding in some of our OARs. So our bladder does overlap quite a bit with our 45 gray PTV, and it gets fairly close to our 54, so we'll have to be a little careful with what we do. So this EUD constraint, I'm not going to push too hard, too fast. I will add an upper as well. Bowel, we really just want to avoid any hot spots. By the way, this bowel contour is kind of weird, but I didn't do it, so but it's fine for practice purposes. You just don't want any hot spots in there. It's not really close to our higher PTV volumes, so I'm going to put an upper of like 46 on there. Push kind of hard just to make sure no hot spots are in there. Our femurs. Kind of a balance between bladder dose and femur dose, so I'd rather kind of remove more dose from the bladder than the femurs, but it does look like we should be able to carve out some dose around those too. Slowly work on those a bit. Same with this genitals contour. It looks like it, you know, at least touches our PTV, but we should be able to get the mean dose to that structure down quite a bit. So something else you can do that I feel helps a lot, especially when you're doing this SIB plan. So right now our rings are based on the dose to our highest PTV, but really, I mean, think about up here, 45 gray volume. we could be a lot stricter on those rings since it's only going to 45. But down here, we don't want to be as strict because this is getting 50-40, this is getting 50-40, this is getting 54. So, it can be kind of hard to know how to push on these. So you can add EUDs, and it'll do a good job of pushing in the areas that it most easily can push on. So hopefully it pushes harder kind of up top where it can, and not so much down here. But still, EUDs are pretty powerful, so you got to be kind of careful with what you do. That's why it's really hard to go wrong with just tiny little movements. Just a couple gray lower than what it's getting, and then evaluate what happens. So if we look at these two, so if we highlight over this constraint, the cost function associated with it is only 4.8%. So I'm going to just up that to 120. This one's a little higher, 14.4%. We are losing a little coverage on these volumes, so I'm not going to push too hard on this one. This one I'll push a little harder because we do have that tail you can see right there. These keep going down, so I'm just going to keep pushing. Probably will stop pushing on these femurs. So maybe just put a max dose constraint, so 0 at 4,000. Just try to keep the max dose lower. If you guys can hear those weird noises, it is not me, it's my dog. She has a whole couch all to herself in my office. Leads a rough life. So this is all looking pretty good. We're definitely losing a lot of coverage on this 45 volume. We definitely are starting to lose coverage on these two higher volumes. So probably done pushing. See, our 50% line is definitely carving around the genitals. It's carving around our femurs, carving out around into our bladder. So that's what I like to see. Big spike here, so I'll pause it. Could maybe leave it paused for a little longer, but Just to make this video go a little faster, we'll unpause, let it get to level 2. All right, level 2. I like to let it go kind of a little past just that beginning of the level, but then I'll pause it. So I don't know, I'm just so used to doing this and looking at it and stuff, but I just realized it might be kind of hard for you guys to tell since I only have 54. I don't have 50, 40, or 45 turned on here. But I suggest you guys, before you get started, I could change them right now, but well, since I'm talking about it, let me just do it. 4,500. We'll change, blue is fine. 50, 40. Always helpful to, you know, have the ISO lines that you're planning to turned on. Okay, so level 2, I'm going to do what I always do. This 45 volume is really cold, so the min dose is getting pretty low. So in addition to adding that extra lower, I'm also going to bump this one up. Add my extra lower on all 3 of these. I'm not doing any math in my head to pick this number. I'm just picking a number that is slightly higher than our prescription dose. So you can see our coverage instantly got better, instantly shot up. Our OARs, if we're focusing on those, or if you guys want to rewind and watch those, some of them probably went up, but that's okay. We need good coverage too. So by pushing these lower than possible, so meaning we push on them until we start losing coverage, and then in level 2 we get that coverage back. That's how we know that we've pushed kind of as hard as we can on our OARs, and whatever they're at now, it just is what's necessary in order to get our good coverage and to get rid of any hot spots, that upper on the body. So if you look here, it looks like 45 is pretty good. These two maybe slightly, oh, this one looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit lower on 54, so we might adjust those priorities even a little bit more once we get to level 3. But anyways, let's let this get to level 3. All right, so same thing as level 2. I like to let it get kind of a little bit into level 3 before I pause. But you can see that spike. I mean, we definitely lost our coverage again, so I'm going to pause it, let it think a bit, see if we get that coverage back or if we need to adjust our priorities. It is coming down pretty quickly, so I imagine this would get better, but I'm just gonna up them a little bit anyways. Maybe like 10 more. All right, I'm gonna just let this play through. I'm gonna let it run through intermediate dose, and we'll take a look when it's done. All right, all done. Let's take a look. And normalize 100 to 95. But that is only to our 54 volume, so we have to look. So our hotspot inside our 54 volume is only 105.7. It's really good. Let's see how our other PTVs look. So 45 is getting about almost 97% coverage. That's pretty good. $50-40, about the same thing, about 97. So both of those are covered pretty well. Let's just look at our dose. Gosh darn it. Absolute dose, there we go. Okay, let's look at 54, 50-40, 45, and 27. Okay, so if you look at those lines, let's look at 45 first. So 45 is looking fairly conformal. Got some of those little holes. Otherwise, pretty good. If we ran it again and backed it up to like level 3 and maybe pushed on all the objectives on PTV 45, it might get a little bit better. Let's look at 50-40. So our 50-40 line is same thing, fairly conformal. We have some 54 spots inside 50-40. So that's about 107% of 50/40. So not too bad, but could probably cool that off. The max is 55, so could definitely push harder on that upper constraint of PTV 50/40 and get that a little cooler. And finally 54 is very conformal, looks very good, very cool. So overall pretty good. If we look at our 27 line, you just don't want that to streak out anywhere too crazy. So again, that looks pretty good. I would argue that we could probably get it to break up a little bit even more right here, but we wouldn't really be sparing anything. There's no OAR up here, so it's probably all right. What just happened? Let's look at 2000. So even that's breaking up in the bladder. So, you know, overall looks pretty good. I'm gonna give you guys constraints to shoot for. If you have any questions, let me know. Next week, we're gonna do the same plan probably, but instead of doing it SIB, so instead of doing all these at once, we're gonna do it sequentially. So you'll treat the whole thing to 45, and then we'll boost to 50/40 and then to 54. But we'll go over that next week. For now, just worry about this plan. And let me know if you have any questions.